Started. If task force members could please take their seats. We have a lot to accomplish this morning, and we'd like to get you out of here more or less on time. So the faster you sit down, the more likely we are to accomplish that goal. Yeah. $2. I'm better. Okay.
Maybe it was intentionally done.
No, he should. And Tom needs a clicker.
You missed the fun dinner, though. At least
It sounded fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We're gonna do process
Yes.
first.
Yes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'd like to spend most of our time today giving you a chance to really chew on what we heard yesterday, and really the culmination of most of the conversations that we've had over the past 4 meetings, and really start to get into some of the specifics that we started talking about yesterday prior to the health panel. So if you all take your seats, we'll get started. Do you want to say anything before?
No, I don't need to say anything.
Okay. All right. So our agenda for today, what we'd like to do is spend a little bit of time in the full group today, just reviewing what the process looks like going forward, because we are, really today going to start to push you a little bit towards getting into the meat of our conversations, testing where there are potential areas of agreement and where you all want to start pushing forward some potential options for recommendations. And so we've worked with the co-chairs on what that looks like, both from a discussion point of view as well as a voting point of view. So we'll walk through that today and how we're going to get some proposals teed up and on the table for our next meeting in February, because obviously we need to do that and to be able to meet the governor's deadline. We've also put together some issue statements based on the issues that we've talked about. Again, these are sort of the 4 major groupings that we've been using over the past several meetings. There are different ways you could organize our work, but our sense is these capture the majority of the issues that are going forward. And we'd like to just, several of you said, we think we're probably in agreement on the issues around, that we're coalescing around these issues, but let's test that and make sure we're all on the same page. So we're gonna actually use our polling technology just to test where we are with that. I'll say more about that when we get to that. Then we're gonna break into small groups and really walk through the issues that we started discussing with Matt yesterday. We didn't really get a chance to discuss the health issues, but got lots of good information from our panel yesterday, and want to spend the majority of our time in small groups starting to vet what are the options for recommendations in these areas, and what further questions do you need to have answered to get to recommendations. So several of those were pulled out from yesterday's conversations that we really want to start to address in those small groups. We'll then come back as a full group, see how far we were able to go in those small groups, and talk about next steps. Does that work for folks? We are getting printed up, Jeff Robbins, to your point yesterday about having 3 lists. We are getting print up the notes that I took on the screen yesterday. I reorganized them a little bit around some of these categories, but didn't delete or change anything to those, so they'll look a little bit different than what was going up live, but just in terms of order and organization. And then the notes from our small groups from December and the compilation that we put together of the submissions from going into that December meeting, which was sort of that other list of the 3 lists that Jeff mentioned yesterday. So we're getting that printed out, so you'll have that for reference in these conversations as we go forward. Any questions about that? A bit of housekeeping before we jump in. We've heard through the grapevine, I just want to finalize our schedule for our very last meeting on February 24th. Many of you requested that we turn that into a 2-day meeting at the last meeting, and we asked for we didn't get a lot of feedback from you all on your schedules, but we've heard that both a combination of the 23rd, 24th does not work for some of you, and the 24th, 25th does not work for some of you. So let's start with the 24th, 25th. Is there anybody who can't make the morning of the 25th work? Because if, Dan? Okay. Okay. You're on the bubble. Is there anybody else either on the bubble or the 25th won't work for you? I think it's critical, obviously, at our last meeting, we have task force members present. So if there are votes, we have you all there. And I know there are several of you who cannot make the 23rd. Is that correct? Okay. So what I would propose is that we actually revert back to a full day meeting on the 24th so that we have everybody in attendance at that meeting. And again, we can work with the co-chairs offline on that if there are anybody shy about sharing their schedule here today. But again, think it's very important to have you all present. Yes, like start 8:30 to 5 kind of notion. Great. Sorry, Lisa, for rearranging our details at the last minute. Okay. With that, then we've again really worked with the co-chairs around how we're going to get to that meeting on the 24th with something final for you all to be able to discuss and vote on. So again, what we want to do is sort of walk through what that process looks like. Again, we're going to, in just a moment here, talk a little bit more about some issue statements and then continue our discussion of solutions and recommendations. I think in talking to most of you throughout the last day and some of you previous to this, we're still in a space where we really need to continue to encourage recommendations to come out. I know there's been some tentativeness on in terms of getting some of those ideas out there before getting a better sense of where the task force is on some of these issues. So we really want to provide the opportunity today for you to get that feedback so that going into February 2nd and 3rd meeting, you all can start putting some pretty concrete proposals on the table. And I'll walk through what that timeline looks like in just a second. So again, by the February 22nd meeting, or February 2nd meeting, which is only 2 weeks away, we would like to have those proposals on the table from you all and really start to begin to move forward on key areas of agreement coming out of that meeting. And then really the February 24th meeting would be used to do any final votes, final wordsmithing, those kinds of things that we need to do on that. With that in mind, the co-chairs have worked on a template, and we'll send this out by email too, so you have it electronically, of how to be thinking about how to start crafting recommendations. We've gotten from your submissions, which is okay, we're a little bit all over the map in terms of how specific the recommendations have been in terms of being at a very high level to some very detailed submissions. So in an effort to try to create a little bit more uniformity around that, we've put together a template on how to start thinking about putting proposals on the table going forward. There's nothing terribly magical about it, but it will hopefully keep a slightly more consistent way to submit these, so that when we're starting to look at proposals, you're looking at more or less the same kind of thing. And I think in talking to you all, there's been some question around that level of detail. I think it's very important for the task force to put forward the intent of its recommendations, what needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen, but we don't necessarily need to get to the point of drafting legislative language, rule change language. Those kinds of things have processes of their own. So it's critically important that you all are clear on what you want to see happen or not see happen, but probably fall short of needing to get into wordsmithing legislative language, for example. Commissioner Lockwood.
So we're sending around this template to get your input and see, are we missing anything in terms of what you all want to see when you review everybody else's recommendations and when you're writing your own? So if we've missed if we've overlooked any categories, just think about what our template should look like. Or if we're on the right track, we're on the right track and we can go with this. So what's our timeline for, when do we want to have this final?
So what we'd like to do in terms of that then coming out of this meeting, and again, we'll come back and revisit this at the end of the meeting, make sure it makes sense based on our conversations that happened today. But is if we can have you begin to put proposals in this format, get them to us at Keystone by January 23rd, which is a week from today. I know that's a tight time frame, but I also know you all have been doing really good thinking on this. So hopefully that shouldn't be too much of a heavy lift. Then we can compile those and get them back out to you prior to the February 2nd meeting. So really we need, in terms of the template, we need to agree that that's sort of the general format we'd like to use going forward today. We will send those all out as soon as we get them. If you get them in sooner, we can send them out in installments. And again, we really encourage you to bring all of your ideas out at the table so that they can be considered for the February meeting, because we will be needing to narrow in on where the greatest areas of agreement are at that point. Does that make sense to folks coming out of this meeting in terms of a process going forward? I know it's a little scary, but it's what we need to do to get to a place of recommendation. So any further thoughts on this? Does this work for people in terms of both time frame and format, and how you're all thinking about proposals? January 23rd, which is a week from today. It's a Friday.
No later than the 23rd.
Which is the halfway point between this meeting and our next. Okay, any questions? I'm going to take silence as acquiescence. Is that fair? Peter?
Well, this is Peter D. with Circ Resources. I mean, I would just make the profound statement that I don't know.
Okay.
And maybe we can circle back on this after we have
Yeah.
before we break today, because on the one hand, I can see the merits of, 21 people, providing their own proposals. On the other hand, I can see it's a terrible waste of,
Yeah.
or multiple duplicity of effort. To have 21 proposals come in, and then the burden is on a few of you to sort through those. I guess I had been thinking from the start that, all of the work we've done and all the discussions we've had would, generate and foster a discussion of these to, kind of openly discuss whether it's the small groups and then back to the big group. All of us, having discussions and maybe advancing some of the straw men in discussion purposes, and then you guys kind of collate those and compile those, realizing it's still a draft and still can be worked at. But it would seem to be that would be a whole lot more efficient. And you've done a great job of capturing a lot of the input from all the prior meetings. So I guess just my off-the-cuff thought would be, it might be more efficient if the Keystone Group with the co-chairs can help summarize and advance the straw man on paper based on the last meeting's discussions, all prior discussions for that matter, and what comes out of today, and give us all something to kind of work with, realizing, any one issue, there may be a range of possible outcomes.
And we'll, again, we will revisit this after we discuss today and see where the sort of major areas of focus are that come out of our conversations today. And Peter, I think that's a reasonable ask in terms of pulling together the options that we get from task force members on how to address some of the specific recommendations. So, and we can certainly work with the co-chairs to do that between now and the next meeting. Okay. What we'd like to do also, just in terms of voting, and again, talking to task force members and a number of you who have asked questions about this is our sense is we're probably not ready to vote on any single proposal today. We are going to be increasingly using polling and to get a sense of the level of agreement that exists in the group. That is different from a formal vote. And per the executive order and just good practice for these groups, when we get to formal voting, we just want to make sure this is clear, both based on our experience in rifle and as we move forward into how we're going to make decisions. Again, as a reminder, we need a 2/3 majority of this group to have a motion pass, but motions will be made and seconded by task force members. We have talked with the co-chairs so that we avoid lengthy conversation where we perhaps don't need it. We will caucus with them just to make sure we're on the same page procedurally in terms of how to move that discussion forward. Once a motion is made, we may entertain conversation first before that caucus, but just want to make sure we're moving that forward. We have co-chairs, so there's not a single person up here who can make that call. So we just want to make sure we're all on the same page. John?
John Golden Dubois. I just have a point of clarification. Sarah, you just mentioned that you need a 2/3 majority for a motion to pass. And I wanted to clarify this because my understanding was that we were talking 2/3 majorities for issues that we wanted to recommend action on to the legislature, but I'm not sure that it was a 2/3 majority for any action to pass from this body.
That's a good that is what the executive order says. That's correct. I would say absent a 2/3 majority, we probably will capture that in terms of the range of views, and that maybe you do have a majority that's not 2/3, and that can be captured in the final findings of the group, so that any decision makers who may take this on have a sense of where the task force ended, and if they're to the extent that there are those not in agreement with the motion, we can capture why that is. So, Bernie.
Is there, sorry, Randy Cleveland, co-chair. Is there clarity around that from the governor and his intent in terms of the executive order and that 2/3 majority? Mike, do you know?
The executive order calls for 2/3 of legislation law. The other recommendations are not required to have a 2/3 majority. They are what they are.
Okay, so just to repeat for the purposes of those listening, and Mike King from DNR just clarified that the 2/3 majority is specifically related to recommendations going forward to the legislature. Any other votes are what they are and will be captured as such. And again, voting will be on the official record. So when we get to formal voting, we will do that by roll call. So you should all be prepared for that. And Bernie, let me just get through this and then we'll come to you. Again, we do have in our ground rules the ability for absent task force members to vote electronically, and in working with the co-chairs, we'd like these votes to happen as soon as possible so that the task force is aware of the final outcome of a vote, so that the timeline that is being proposed is 48 hours from the end of the meeting, and that we will report that back out to the full task force at the end. Mr. Busher and then Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you. This is Bernie Busher. I've spent a lot of time studying the executive order, and I agree with Mike's statement. There's a couple of subtleties that we should be aware of. It seems to me that a decision to support an existing request from CDPHE, as we were requested to do yesterday, is a majority vote. A decision to recommend regulatory changes is a majority vote, but a decision to request new legislation is a 2/3 vote. That's the way I read the executive order, and I think that that is correct. Well,
Yeah, Jim and then Perry.
I just want to follow up the same issue about they are what they are. Does that mean they have to have at least a majority vote to be included?
Yes, and we will likely capture in a final report even votes that didn't pass and the reasons for their non-passage. So just as we have in the meeting minutes.
So recommendations that don't get a majority wouldn't be passed on.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Pierce?
Thank you. This is Perry Pierce. I apologize. Bernie's clarification has confused me, so I want to step back and make sure I understand. If the task force, as was discussed a couple of times yesterday, wants to suggest to the legislature that they increase a recommended budget level of funding for something, some program, FTE or whatever it is that a majority or a 2/3 vote?
So does that require legislation and therefore?
Thank you. This is Bernie. It can get fairly subtle. My reading is that a request to support new legislation requires a 2/3. It seems to me, and it's not clearly laid out, that supporting an existing request from a department is simply a majority vote.
Yes, I was just going to make that point, Mr. Quinn.
I'm afraid we can have a dozen variations on that, and I'm not sure if I could speculate beyond that.
So this is an advisory committee. You all are not the ones who will have to act on the recommendations for the most part of this group. We will capture votes as they are passed or not passed, and it will, as Mr. Quinn just pointed out, the more of the majority that you have in a recommendation, the stronger that recommendation will probably carry weight with those who are moving those forward. So I won't get too caught up in the majority versus 2/3 majority, and would argue that maybe I'm overly optimistic that we should strive for a 2/3 majority in all recommendations going forward. And again, we'll capture it if we fall short of that as well. Mr. Moreno.
Just for clarification out of the numbers here, so the 2/3 majority would be 14 votes to pass. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's right. Okay. Any further questions on voting or the procedure? And again, our sense is we're not ready to go to formal votes at this meeting, but we did want to let you know we are thinking through this process so that it's eminently clear to you all when we get to that point how we'll be conducting this. Okay. Any further questions on voting? All right, what we'd like to do is get into current issues. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of different ways you can group what we've talked about. Because this is a complex set of issues that you can very quickly get overwhelmed with, sorry, you okay? You can very quickly get overwhelmed with what seems like an endless list of potential recommendations. That said, I think there are some major themes that have come out that have been relatively consistent over the past 2 or 3 meetings that we've talked about. So again, these are overlapping categories. Some of the solutions absolutely will be overlapping. So we spent some time talking about comprehensive planning yesterday. That's potentially a solution to a number of the issues that this group has heard from. But the way that we have been moving forward with some of the conversations is a recognition that multi-well facilities and infrastructure consolidation, especially in urban areas, is both an opportunity that needs to be addressed, as well as the impacts of those needing to be addressed. And that's one key area that we've focused on. The local government role in planning and siting has been obviously a key area of discussion. Health and safety, the panel that we heard from yesterday, as well as some of the recommendations that have been coming out. And then it says here enforcement of it should be also application of existing regulations. So how do we strengthen the existing regulatory framework are sort of the major category areas that we've been talking about. The sub-bullets on this slide start to offer some of the solutions that have been offered in those areas. Again, the solutions may be, and our recommendations may be overlapping across several of these areas, but our sense is this has been consistent really since we met in Loveland in terms of the overarching areas of discussion for the task force. Again, there are other ways you can slice and dice this, but our sense is this is where we are. Mr. Golden Dubois, and then Mr. Holly. Actually, you were first.
Doesn't matter.
So.
Brad Holly with Anadarko. I think the task force has this, but the way it's worded, I want to make very clear that we say multi-well facilities.
Yes.
The well and the facility can be split, and it's very different how we deal with those things. So the distinction I'd like to remind everyone of is that, and I think many times they are together, and they're together to try to reduce surface impact. But the wells are much harder to relocate due to the mineral resources that you're trying to get to. The wells will have a temporary nature to them in the drilling of completions of them. And then after they are completed and put on production, there's very little ongoing disturbance with the wells. The facilities, as we know, are much different with the tankage, and those can be separated. And so I think as we talk about it, I want to make sure that as we work on solutions, that we don't lump the wells and the facilities together, because we can treat those very differently if we need to.
Is there a better phrasing for that? We've struggled a bit with that. Brad, is there a better way to say that?
I just think understanding the distinction, and when we talk about solutions, I think we need to be clear if we're talking about production facilities or if we're talking about wells.
Okay, great.
May
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I know I'm out of order, but let me
Yes, you are.
suggest,
Yes.
the way I typically phrase that is multi-well pads and production facilities. That's the separation that I make because I understand exactly what you're talking about, Brent. I don't know if that's helpful to others.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay. Getting thumbs up around. All right, Mr. Golden Dubois.
This is
then
John
we have-
Golden Dubois. So this kind of follows up in part on Mr. Holly's suggestion and question, is that it seems to me that we are lacking here a fair amount of the precision that was included in some of our conversations. And I just want to understand if these are here as sets of topics that we are discussing,
Yes.
or if they are designed to be inclusive. As an example, there were conversations yesterday in the first category that suggested one of those solutions, and hence one of the bullet points would be to move these facilities further away. Similarly, under health and safety, there have been a variety of different proposals that suggest enhanced monitoring, that suggest increased standards for emissions, those kind of things. So I want some clarity
Yeah, this
so
is
that I
not
understand if
inclusive.
these are buckets or if these are the bullet points and these are what we're talking
No,
about.
no, these are buckets, not inclusive at this point. And frankly, my sense is you can't be inclusive on a single slide. So, and that's what we're going to discuss in the small breakouts today, is what needs to be on the list under these broader issue areas. Mr. George, and then Ms. Barwinski, and Will, you're back.
I wanted to talk about the enforcement of existing regulations, and my point may have actually been resolved with what John is clarifying with the other pieces too. So, but I'll make the point and then we'll be sure that's true. In the way this is phrased, it may miss a point that's been made constantly about recent regulatory change that we have not had time to see how it's going to play. And a lot of the issues that we're worrying about have been treated with these changes. So I just needed to know that that concept is subsumed in the language here. If it isn't, then we have to step it up.
Yeah, and actually our next step is we're going to pull on some more specific definition of just the issue areas, not the solutions, which I think is absolutely not inclusive, and we need to have better, more, I won't use the word robust discussion on those, but been told that has been an overused word. So we want to get agreement on, or get a sense of the level of agreement on the issue areas. Again, we've actually added an additional issue area that came out yesterday pretty clearly around sort of that need for a centralized place for information for a variety of different purposes. to go forward. Ms. Barwinski.
Thank you. I actually, part of mine has been addressed. I do think that we're talking about multi-well production facilities, and that's usually what, and I think maybe that's even worth inserting in terms of guiding the conversation. And then under that, I would echo what had been said, that it's not just I know that you can't have everything on there, but I think a big part of our discussion has been locating these further away, and I think that would be good to, I think that'd be worth capturing as a bullet as we continue to talk about it. So I would suggest multi-well production pads, and then solutions that could help move them further away from homes and schools or residences.
Okay. What we'd like to do, any further comments on that? Mr. Tour, you're back up.
Thanks, this is Will Tour. And I think this is perhaps captured by John's comments, but under the health and safety, I think it's important to have not only monitoring and reporting, but mitigation, additional mitigation measures.
So, and again, mitigation is one of those that might address several of the issue areas as well. So again, we will work on that. What I'd like to do, Brooke is gonna, are you ready, Brooke? We're gonna use our Turning Point technology to just sort of test level of agreement on these issue areas. Hopefully for those of you who've been feeling the need for us to get closure on, we've hit the right balance of inclusivity and narrowing in on some of these specific issue areas. So we're gonna do some polling. I will make one caveat here that we've put some specific language to these issues. We just want to get a sense of your level of comfort with them. We're not going to wordsmith those significantly in full group today. If there isn't a strong sense of comfort with these, we'll work with you between now and February to get that going further. What the document that went around that looks like this, again, the very first set of bullets, there should have been a page break. My apologies, I did this late last night, was just the slide that we just put up there. And then are the notes from yesterday's conversations, the notes from the small group breakouts in December, and the summary of issues from the submissions that we got prior to December. Again, these are just for your reference as we get into these conversations, so that we're not losing any of those. Again, you know, I feel fairly confident that we can summarize and group these, but I don't want you to feel like we're dropping important issues off the table as a result of that grouping. So I want to make sure you have the benefit of both. So, yes, Dwayne.
Short point, but I think it's relevant before we start voting. I think the ombudsman role is perhaps a little broader and larger than to be a bullet beneath enforcement of existing regulations. I think there's an educational component there, and a lot of the things that could go with that. So I'd suggest breaking that out into one of the bold bullets prior to voting. Again, I think there perhaps is an enforcement of an existing regulation, but there's a lot of education outreach and so forth that in my mind promotes that to one of the bold bullet status for voting purposes.
Yeah, that's great. And we've actually added an issue statement based on yesterday's conversation to address that sort of broader need around access into the system of education and information. So again, we may not have gotten it quite right. We'll take that feedback in just a second. So, oh my goodness. Nobody wants to be pinned down to a vote just yet. Mr. Sura, Mr. Busher, and then Mr. Robbins.
There's an area that isn't really reflected in the buckets that you have there, and I'm wondering if there's going to be a time to bring that back, and I'm worried that the train is leaving the station, so I thought I'd throw this in. We talked a lot about landowner rights in the negotiations with the oil and gas industry, but also adjacent landowner rights and standing before the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I don't really see that reflected anywhere up there, and just, I guess I'd be curious to hear from my fellow commissioners if they'd be willing to look at those issues as well.
Great. Mr. Busher?
Thank you. This is Bernie, but if you, could you put the slide back up?
Which one?
Um,
Sarah, you're not. Oh, of the current issues?
Yeah, the
It's
current-
actually right in front of you here. In terms of the,
The heading is multi-well facilities.
I wanted to make sure that the discussions that we had with Larry Walk on
Yeah.
various health studies, registries, and so forth
right.
are adequately covered in here, and I'm not sure they are.
Yeah, no, and again, we're going to spend the morning talking about those potential recommendations that are coming out, and you are correct. We didn't, as a full group, get to really debrief that conversation, so that's part of the plan for the small groups is to get more of that on the table. Ms. Wedgeworth gave me a list this morning that we will include going forward as well. So we'll make sure to get those in. Again, don't focus too much on the solution sets here. This is a very brief list. You've talked about much, much more, and we're going to talk more about that when we get into breakouts. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Jeff Robbins. Not to be too anal about this, but yesterday I was asking about the fact that we're creating a list.
Right.
And we had two lists that came about from the last meeting.
Yes.
And what's been presented, I just was looking through what they gave us, guys. We now have two lists. We don't have three. So someone has taken the two lists from the last meeting and consolidated that down to one list, which is now one page, basically, notes from December small group discussions. I frankly don't have the other list, so I don't know whether this is, and I'm not pointing fingers, I don't know if this captures all of the things that came out of the small group discussions that we all felt were important, but it definitely is a synthesization of those other lists. So I'm putting a placeholder out there.
Sure.
I'd like to go back and compare my notes
Sure.
to those other lists.
Yeah. And we will have time again between now and February. But again, I think part of what we need to do today is get a sense of where the center of gravity is for this group on these major issue areas. And again, my sense is you all do have a center of gravity around those issues. And again, we don't want to lose good ideas, but I think that will come through in our small group discussions as well today. So fair enough. Yes, Mr. George, and then Mr. Rao, Mr. Quinn, and then we're going to move forward here. And we'll take these further conversations into the small groups. I'm not trying to shut down the conversation. I just think we can be more productive as we get into a smaller conversation.
I think what I'm hearing is probably true for all of us, that we all have in our notes issues that are not fully in play today, but you've already told us what to do with that.
Right.
And that's our homework for this next week. And so we'll have this very conversation in full next time we're together, because we will have created the third list that is totally comprehensive. By the time we all fill out the form, get all of our issues important to us in front of staff, all of that will be collated. If we miss anything, you still get that last conversation to get it in. So I think that's the fail-safe here, and that's where my head is headed for details. So
Great. And again, there is also that opportunity as soon as we break into small groups as well. Mr. Rao.
Thank you. This is Bruce Rao. So just a comment following up a little bit on Jeff's and Matt's. I guess I remember pretty distinctly expressing, and I think the group having long conversations about concerns of surface owners and adjacent owners. And I find those issues on none of the pages that are included in front of us. And I guess that's a little bit disturbing to me. Because there were significant periods of time spent discussing those both at the December meeting and some yesterday. And in fact, Sarah, I think I sent some of those to you yesterday at the end of the meeting at your request, being concerned that they'd be excluded. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out if I'm not communicating well, or if there's some particular reason we're not including those issues that are important to task force members and are in fact part of the governor's directive to us on the list.
Yeah. Sir. Yes. Mr. Quinn.
I guess I do. This is Pat Quinn. I do want to make my point, to Matt's point, that on the multi-well facilities and the bullet point is local government role, whether it be, I assume, some type of comprehensive planning. I mean, to try to do the specifics as a bullet point, but by definition, I mean, I think if in Brookfield, if you had the planning and zoning and a planning staff involved, I mean, the service owners, the adjacent service owners, those are all part of the process. And so we're really talking about incorporating the oil and gas operations in the same planning process, which in my opinion, by definition, would include adjacent service owners. So.
Yeah. And Mr. Rao and Mr. Sura, I think you're suggesting that we add another issue area that specifically captures the need to better address surface owner, adjacent neighbor, mineral rights owner issues in the solutions that the task force
Yes, and I guess I would
develops.
say I am in fact reiterating that request from at least several times before.
So we can definitely do that as well. For the issue statements that we do have, and again, we can put another one towards the end here. We just want to get a sense of have we hit the mark right? Again, I will say, as Mr. Quinn actually just gave us a good segue towards, some of the solutions may be more comprehensive than the issue statements that we're addressing to be able to get to some of the resolutions. So we don't want to get too hung up here in wordsmithing these. Again, we're just going to take some temperatures here on these issue statements, and then we'll break into small groups. And if we need to discuss those further, we can. Again, if we need to wordsmith them between now and the February meeting, we will. We will get your input on that. And we will, if I'm not sure we can do it on the fly with our technology, but if we can add another issue area for you to pull on, explicitly recognizing the need to better address affected parties such as surface owners, adjacent neighbors, and mineral rights owners, we will do that as well. So,
yep. Does everyone have a clicker in front of them? Does anyone not have a clicker? And you can't have two.
I got two. I've got.
Does anyone want to vote for Ken?
Yes.
Process question.
Go ahead.
I think there were a number of us that asked at the last meeting, and this is just strictly process. I don't want to make this a big deal, but it would be really nice to see the list of questions we're going to be asked before we answer any of the particular questions. It just so we have an idea what we're getting into and can evaluate sort of the breadth of what we're doing rather than sort of being led down a trail.
Yes. So Brooke, can you walk through the slides before we actually take votes on them?
Yes, so we can go through them, I think. So I'll go through the clickers really quick again. Just remember, you can change your votes as many times. Each one will have, except for the first test question, which we'll have again, like the last time when we had the Bronco at the airport, we'll have a test question. And then we'll go through, each one will have the same answers. We'll see those. You just pick one of the choices. They'll correlate. You only have to hit it once. You'll see the response on the screen as well. So you know, just remember to point to me and not the screen. Send all the rays this way. So we'll go through the questions before we vote. Okay, first question. The task force recognizes the need to reduce surface impacts and conflicts with multi-well production facilities while also recognizing the benefits of consolidation and acknowledging the realities of impacts when sited near residential areas.
And again, that very first one came from one of the small groups from December. So that's the wording from that small group worked on.
So this is the second question. The task force recognizes that the lack of clarity regarding local government authority is creating significant tension regarding siting and regulating oil and gas development in Colorado. This has the potential to put siting decision at odds with local land use planning decisions. Task force recognizes that Colorado has a robust regulatory framework, some of which is new and has yet to take full effect, which addresses some of the issues above and others the task force has considered. More efficient and consistent application and enforcement of this regulatory framework would help address some concerns. The task force recognizes that there are public concerns regarding the long-term health effects and overall safety of oil and gas development, as well as the need for ongoing transparency, surveillance, monitoring, and study. The task force recognizes that there is not a centralized and easily accessible repository of data and information regarding oil and gas in Colorado.
And then again, we can add one recognizing the need to add an additional specific issue around surface mineral and adjacent neighbor issues. So,
do you want to add it now? It'll take a few minutes, but.
Yes.
Randy Cleveland, co-chair. Maybe it's just me, but can we clarify what does support and support with changes?
So yes, and so in terms of your three options on these, option A looks pretty good. You know, we're good. I'm comfortable with that statement going forward. Option B is it's close, but it needs some changes to move forward. And C is I'm not in agreement at all with it. Does that help? Okay, is that clear? Okay. So let's go ahead, Mr. D.
Yeah, it's not clear to me what the purpose of this exercise is. Could you clarify?
Sure.
the
Again, we
constructive-
just want to get a sense. I think what has been happening in our conversations, even yesterday as we got into solutions, is the feeling of getting very overwhelmed by a long list of potential solutions. So again, this is getting a sense as we move into recommendations of what the task force is trying to address in terms of the findings of the task force. Again, and we just want a sense of, is there general convergence around these key issues? That help?
Well, I think on what you just said, there's a little bit of a confusion between, issues and solutions. Some of these things are kind of leaning towards a leap of presumption, like the health one, for example. You're linking two different things there in my mind. One is, you want to put the health one back up, please? So, recognizing, public concerns over health effects, that's a little bit different than the need for ongoing study. Just for example, I won't share how I feel about it, but I think there's two different answers. I think you're linking two different things, and I'm not even sure how I'd vote because I disagree with one and agree with another.
Okay.
But I just suggest we make this very quick because I think it's a waste of time.
Okay.
Pat, do you still want to talk or? Okay.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to, I just spilled coffee on the clicker.
Oh, no.
This is Dan Kelly with Noble Energy, and real proud of myself here. Microphones. I read through those as quickly as we could, and thank Bruce for letting us do that. But there are some things embedded in each one of those that you can go one way on one part of it and another way on another part of it. And it seems to me if you just press do not support, that way you're keeping yourself from getting yourself tangled up here. So, and I don't want to do that, but I'm a little bit concerned that there are a lot of issues in some of these. So I'll just throw that in for the record also.
Yes, and again, this was really to get a sense of the general groupings of the issues that we're dealing with, trying not to get too much into that solution space. But again, some of the issues that you all have raised lend to, and we don't have to do this exercise if you all don't want to. I'm sensing some hesitancy here, but Mr. Rao. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Just respecting, Peter, your point of view on whether this is worthwhile or not, I just would add, if we were going to do it, maybe it's worthwhile then in option D, which is please subdivide this issue.
Okay, I would say that, yeah, in option B, that's sort of some support with some changes needed. We can also do this after we do breakouts, and we can work on the wording of these between now and then, if that's more helpful. Okay, let's just do it. Let's just do it. Again, we can revisit this as we come back. So Brooke, take us through the exercise.
Okay. We will start with a test question. So hopefully we can practice again. So what is that smell? The first choice, so on your clicker, A would be bacon, B, feedlot, C, bitter disappointment of the Broncos losing, D, Doug's feet, Doug is over there, and E, other. Doug, raise your hand. So the polling is open, so you can make your choice. All right. Yeah, if the green light went off. Yep.
Yeah. Mr. Kelly, is yours working? Yeah. We can get you another one if it's not. Okay. So we had 25% said bacon, 30% said feedlot, 5% only felt bitter about the Broncos losing, 20% said Doug's feet, and 20% said other. So we do not have consensus on that.
There is none. Okay, first question here. The task force recognizes the need to reduce surface impacts and conflicts with multi-well production facilities, while also recognizing the benefits of consolidation and acknowledging the realities of impacts when sited near residential areas. So again, A, or number one on your clicker, would be support. B is support with changes. C, do not support. Is everyone comfortable with their choice? Great, so we had 65% say support, 30% said support with changes, 5% do not support. Okay. Next question. The task force recognizes that the lack of clarity regarding local government authority is creating significant tension regarding siting and regulating oil and gas development in Colorado. This has the potential to put siting decision at odds with local land use planning decisions. So again, A, support, B, support with changes, C, do not support. So we had 60% say support, 20% support with changes, 20% said do not support. Next question. The task force recognizes that Colorado has a robust regulatory framework, some of which is new and has yet to take full effect, which addresses some of the issues above and others the task force has considered. More efficient and consistent application and enforcement of this regulatory framework would help address some concerns. So polling's open. You guys are getting fast here. So 40% said support, 45% said support with changes, 15% said do not support. Next question. The task force recognizes that there are public concerns regarding the long-term health effects and overall safety of oil and gas development, as well as the need for ongoing transparency, surveillance, monitoring, and study. So 55% said support, 40% said support with changes, and 5% do not support. And last question. The task force recognizes that there is not a centralized and easily accessible repository of data and information regarding oil and gas in Colorado. So 60% said support, 25% support with changes, 15% said do not support.
And Brooke, can we quickly do one on the need to address adjacent owners, surface owners, and mineral rights owners?
Can I make a suggestion on that or a clarification? I think we're talking not just about adjacent owners, but adjacent residents.
Adjacent neighbors.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you,
So adjacent neighbors, surface owners, and mineral rights owners. And again, we will work on a little bit better language for all of these, given the way the voting came out. But again, should just give us a sense.
So it's adjacent neighbors, surface owners.
And mineral rights owners. The need to better address their standing. Is that a fair way of saying that?
Sorry.
So they want to place it.
Yeah, I think it's an issue of conflicts that are created as a relation to the consolidation we're seeing. I think it's sort of the overriding issue. I don't know if Matt would agree with that, or Jeff, your thoughts, but. Where's Matt? There you are.
Do we want something else added in the
I
question?
think
Sorry.
we'll use this as a placeholder for right now. We'll work with those of you.
Sorry, I'll change this last. Okay, we can see that one.
Mr. Corliss.
I guess to get me comfortable with this, and I apologize if I'm in the minority.
If you could speak into the mic.
Here's the coffee again. Cheers.
We're going to get lids for the coffee cups at the next meeting, I promise.
I guess my point is to increase my comfort level with this process. I always like to know what the purpose and the benefit of something is. And I'm not so sure I understand. I don't mean to be throwing anything in the wrench here, a wrench in the box or anything, but if we vote any of these, what happens? Why are we doing this?
Right. Again, as it's for your information as we get into the small breakouts around where the group as a whole is in terms of the issues that the task force needs to address. So this is not a formal vote. It is a way to help organize our thinking as we go into conversations. Right. Okay, so let's get through this. And again, we'll take further discussion of this into the small groups. We do recognize there's a really key connection between some of the solutions and issues. And so that's what the small group conversations we hope will help flesh out the nuance of.
Great, so you can go ahead and vote on this issue. We have adjacent neighbors, surface owners, and mineral rights owners, and the need to address standing. And if you voted before, I just resetted it, so just make sure you click again, but it looks like we have 19 so far.
I'm not voting, so go ahead. I don't get it. So.
Then we should have everybody there. So 42% said support, 37 support with changes, 21 do not support.
Great. Okay, so again, we are now, Brooke, if you can hook me back up. again, and what I, just sharing personally, what take away from that is we're in the right ballpark in terms of the issues. Is there anything that was missing from that list? I guess is the only question. No. And so what we'd like to do now is take this into further conversation into small groups. Yes. Which I will put up here in just a second. Christine is going to be with, I know we probably should have come up with a better name than Group A and Group B, since Group B last time took offense. Again, Christina will be with Group A, I will be with Group B. And what we want to do is around these sort of major issue areas, start to get into more specific conversation about options for recommendations and what you need. What are the options for recommendations to address these issues? Again, we have fleshed out some of that. I think you all have some key questions for each other in terms of what you'd like to put forward in some of those options, and then what major questions need to get answered to get to a recommendation. So for example, one of the major issues that came out yesterday that I think Mr. Busher and Mr. Robbins put a key question out on the table with respect to the local government role is, is it a state process that the local government role has input into, or is it a local government process that is coordinated with a state role? So those are some of the kinds of key questions that need to come out of these conversations today, that we're hoping to get out of the conversations today, so that you all can put your thinking caps on in terms of moving forward with proposals going into the February meeting. Does that make sense? Okay. Why don't we keep, sorry, it was there. We'll keep Group A here, and then we have this smaller room over here. I know yeah, you're all in the same group. We'll take the Group B in the back here. Sorry, just a second. Let me just read it off and we'll try to get it up here. So please pay attention into what Group A will be: Bernie Busher, Jim Fitzgerald, John Golden Dubois, Brad Hawley, Dan Kelly, Steve Moreno, Kent, if he returns, Matt Sura, Will Tour, and Dwayne Zavadil. Group B is everybody who was not called, but Sarah Barwinski, Peter D., Russ George, Tom Corliss, Perry Pierce, Pat Quinn, Bruce Rao, Jeff Robbins, and Elbra Wedgeworth. Okay, so Group B, we're going to go back there. Again, if you're a member of the public, you may listen in to either of the two conversations.
I'm sorry. Are you staying?
Yeah.
I go.
Yeah.
You're in Group B?
Right.
Good job, Sam. You know what? Let me just